Hello YouTube, back for an AEW Dynamite review for February 22nd, 2023. Been the first times that I've gotten a chance to do a review in a while, so why not come back on this episode here on the road to Revolution. It is forthcoming in short order. So let's talk about this episode a little bit here. A couple of interesting things. For the most part though, it was kind of a step on the road to Revolution, if you will, if we're going to borrow the WrestleMania vernacular here a little bit. So it's one of those things where some things did move forward, but at the same time, a little bit of it is in cruise control, but things are starting to fill out, and we'll talk about it here a little bit as we go along. So let me get right into it. We start off with Orange Cassidy taking on Wheeler Yuta for the All-Atlantic Championship and having that match. Now, as usual, in kind of typical AEW style, the lead into this is very short. It's kind of like, two guys confronting each other. Wheeler Yuta confronts Orange Cassidy, kind of downgrades him for, now he's with the Blackpool Combat Club and he's going to learn more with them than he ever learned under Orange Cassidy. So there's a little bit of a loose thread. And at the same time, there is history with Wheeler Yuta and the Best Friends coming in with them initially, and now being with the Blackpool Combat Club and being with those guys that, are increasingly adopting a more and more aggressive style. So there is like a slow storyline progression with the Blackpool Combat Club, interestingly enough, with Claudio and with Wheeler Yuta and obviously with John Moxley. So they're ratcheting up the intensity with it, and Wheeler Yuta is kind of channeling that, and he's still the Ring of Honor Pure Champion, so he's got that going on for him. So it's one of those things where I'm okay with it, because at least it does have a little bit of a dynamic into it. And again, since they do have a little bit of background to play into, the announcers have been able to explain that along the way of having this match. I won't go into the blow by blow, but at the end of the day, this would be one that maybe I would take some time if you're interested in checking out. As far as a match quality wise, it's definitely there. The All Atlantic Championship usually results in some good matches because Orange Cassidy knows how to ratchet it up. But I will say, as I mentioned a moment ago, with the whole story thing, that with a little bit of history between the two characters, is that Orange Cassidy was able to play into the whole idea that he's trying to extend the olive branch, and Wheeler Yuta is rejecting it all throughout the match. So they're having a lot of chain wrestling, but then also in the middle of the match, Claudio comes down and basically slaps Wheeler Yuta to, tell him to get it over with and get on with it. And Wheeler Yuta immediately ratchets up the intensity. And as a result of that, Orange Cassidy eventually also has to ratchet up the intensity. And you see a little bit more of an aggressive side to Orange Cassidy in this match than is the traditional, which for his character is actually really good because it's stating that the Wheeler Yuta threat forced it out of him. And in the end, he tries to reconcile, but then Claudio basically directs Wheeler Yuta to get away. So you've got that little storyline element playing into it. So the match was good, and a little bit of storyline sprinkle in there I thought was solid for what it was. Now from the opener, we move to hearing from Ricky Starks, who comes down to ringside, gets a great reaction from the crowd. The crowd in Arizona was actually quite good. I believe it was Arizona. The crowd in Arizona is quite good, so they're pretty solid for this. And he immediately starts talking about it, and then he says basically that Chris Jericho is not going to give him his rematch, so he offers an open contract for Revolution because he wants to be in the Revolution show. So it's one of those things where it's a little bit frustrating in terms of that. Now, before I get all the way into that, I will say that there was a backstage vignette with Evil Uno and Adam Page kind of setting up the main event, and Evil Uno trying to talk up the fact that he wanted to stand up on behalf of Dark Order, and that everything that Hangman has said, it basically states that Dark Order is not on his level, which at the end of the day, if we're really taking the storyline all the way through, it's that Hangman is basically saying they're not on his level. So I kind of agree with that assessment. But this is the idea here is that Evil Uno is going to stand up to John Moxley as like a message to the rest of Dark Order that they won't be pushed around and that they won't tolerate being like looked past. So I thought this was good, and at the end of the day, Evil Uno asks Page to stay out of the match regardless of what happens, which is fine, and that's going to come back into play in the main event. So Ricky Starks goes down and basically talks about that he's going to move on from the Jericho Appreciation Society and Jericho, and again, as I mentioned a moment ago, he's got an open contract for Revolution. He's asking somebody to come down and face him. And then Chris Jericho comes out, and it's the whole ego play again. Chris Jericho talking about it's like, I know what you're trying to do, and this whole thing. I did enjoy the little tease where Peter Avalon was actually coming out to potentially accept the challenge to get on a pay-per-view, and then Chris Jericho takes him out with the Judas effect and effectively plays right into his hands. Like, I won't go into the whole thing. The promo was fine, but it was just a convoluted, long-winded way of getting Jericho to be tricked, quote-unquote, into accepting his challenge, agreeing to not let any of the Jericho Appreciation Society come to ringside, and it ends with Jericho walking away, strutting that he's not going to outsmart the Ocho, and then Ricky Starks smirking for the camera and playing up to the fact that he got exactly what he wanted. So this feud will continue at least into the pay-per-view, and hopefully, that's the blow off to this match, and we can see Ricky Stark move on to something else. I'm hoping. That's what I'm crossing my fingers to. The promo, as I said, was fine, but it's a vehicle to get us to the next part of it. So next up, we have the Acclaimed taking on Big Bill and Lee Moriarty. I'll be completely honest with you, I had very little to no interest in this match. The match was fine for what it was, but at the end of the day, it's just a vehicle to get the Guns to come out and kind of continue their feud with the Acclaimed. I really do wish they would make a little bit more use out of Big Bill and Lee Moriarty to a lesser degree, but Big Bill, I would like to see him do some more things rather than just be in these odd appearances here and there with the firm. But here it is. This was a situation. Overall, the Acclaim win, which is fine. And it just continues on the storyline with the whole thing. Eventually it's going to come back down to the Acclaim and the Guns facing off in some capacity, more than likely. And when that happens, the only part I'm not sure about is exactly where they're going to go at it from there. If I was to pose a guess, my guess would be that if they do manage to encounter each other, I wouldn't be shocked if this results in Billy Gunn turning on the Acclaimed, and therefore the Guns can have at least a little bit of a title run as heels before eventually losing the title to somebody. I just wouldn't take the title off. If you went through the trouble of putting the title on them, which I question the judgment on it, but I'm okay with it. If you let them at least have the title for a little while, you come up with different ways of them cheating to retain the title. Don't take the title off them right away because it kind of cheapens the thing. The tag team titles have actually been pretty well protected for the most part, in that most of the tag team title runs have at least had a little bit of a runway. So the Guns just got it. So one way or the other, I would see them retain at least for the next little bit to allow that to continue, where the next champions then also have their opportunity to have a little bit of a run with it as well. So next up, Tony Schiavone welcomes out Christian Cage, who's almost immediately attacked by Jungle Boy. Back and forth, but then Christian Cage hits a low blow and then smashes the chair in the face of Jungle Boy. Jungle Boy's left bleeding, so Christian Cage got the upper hand. So this feud will continue endlessly. My question, where is Luchasaurus? I'm just saying, like, if you're going to continue this thing, Luchasaurus, I don't think he's dead as far as we know. It just seems weird that Christian Cage wouldn't have had Luchasaurus somewhere nearby to help him with this, and he had to do the low blow and get the upper hand himself, but fine, whatever. It's one of those things where I understand the concept of this feud, and I understand that they have to restart the feud after Christian Cage's injury in order to give a conclusion to it. I just don't know where the guys go after that, so it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a storyline, but at the same time, it's a storyline that I don't think there's a lot of heat for. It'll be a decent match, I think, but I'm just not sure where the interest level is in terms of just continuing it for the sake of continuing it. But there it is. So next up here, we have the ladies match, and this one really is just an excuse to kind of continue the storyline going that's brewing between them. I'll talk about it here at the end here, but it's Saraya with Toni Storm taking on Sky Blue. So when it's, Sky Blue has actually been a bit of a fan favorite there, and they've definitely made a lot of use out of her in terms of at least finding ways of getting her on TV, which has been good. She's one of the more developmental talents they've got on there, who's done well for what she's been given. And this was just a good excuse for Saraya to have a one-on-one match that kind of continues the storyline, because usually it's Toni Storm carrying the load. I'm glad that Saraya is getting limited action. She's getting a little bit here and there, but this was a match for her to be able to do that. And she's very much adapted to her heel style, which has actually worked out quite well for her, which I think is actually good, because it allows her to avoid a lot of it allows her to take more shortcuts, and she doesn't have to worry about being crowd pleasing with a lot of the moves. She just has to cheat a lot, which is perfectly fine, and I think works into the character she's playing with. She seems to be enjoying it, which I think helps a lot with it. And Toni Storm has kind of been the quiet assassin, helping her a little bit because she's not saying too much. Saraya's doing a lot of the talking for this group, but right now it's fine, and I think it continues to build what they're working on. The match itself was fine for what it was. It wasn't anything spectacular. It wasn't anything particularly interesting, but the result of it was really going to come down to cheating, and then Saraya hits a thrust kick and locks in her PTO finisher. And that's great, because what that does is that it reestablishes the finisher, which I don't think she's used in AEW too much. As far as I'm aware, I think that's the first time she's actually used this finisher. So she gets the win on TV, which is great. And then they're going to attack Sky Blue, and that results in Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker coming out to make the save. Now, this next part is the important part. The match itself, like I said, was basically just a vehicle to get them to the next step of this process. So they clear the ring of them. The heels are on the outside. They're kind of talking trash back and forth at each other. And then and as they're making their retreat, Ruby Soho comes out, and it continues the whose side is she on kind of storyline that they didn't quite resolve when they had their three-way match with Britt Baker and Ruby Soho and Toni Storm. So it kind of continues this whole process. But what happens is that Ruby Soho kind of looks past them and kind of tells Saraya and Toni Storm to step aside because she wants to put her focus on Jamie Hayter, and makes the gesture that she wants the next title shot. And they kind of bicker back and forth, and they move on from there, and that'll be playing the storyline element. Now, the end result of it, just quickly skipping ahead a little bit, is that they do a backstage promo where Jamie Hayter kind of talks up both people and states that she would like to do it as a three-way match for their pay-per-view. So she's agreed to a match against Ruby Soho and Saraya. Now, from the storyline perspective, I think this is good because it still leaves open that idea of whose side is she on. It's an opportunity where, if I was going to guess, my guess would be that Ruby Soho would, quote-unquote, turn on AEW and join Saraya and Toni Storm to comprise a third element of that group. Eventually, I believe that Sheeta would end up with the AEW originals, quote unquote. And then I guess you would have to fill in one or two more slots on each side in order to potentially get. I think what it's leading to eventually is kind of a little faction warfare leading into a blood and guts match. If I was going to guess, a ladies' blood and guts match is probably where you'd end up seeing this eventually go to. And if that's the case, well, then you got to keep filling out the roster between the two of them. And Ruby Soho would be your betrayer. And that would be kind of how that would play into the story. And I think Ruby Soho as a heel right now would be a good refresh on her character. She's been better since she's gotten back. She's gotten a little bit of airtime, which is good. And if you're going to do it, it would make sense, I think, because it would allow her to kind of be more aggressive in the ring. It would allow her to showcase some other elements of it. And then she could always go back to being a face later on. But she was kind of generic as a face anyway. So give her something else to do. And at least I could see that. Hopefully, eventually, if I'm looking even further down and projecting forward, that could eventually lead into several of them splitting off into their own feuds. And it allows the division to actually get more storylines rather than focusing on this specific one. But the truth is, given the lack of storylines they've had, just the continuation of a storyline is still a step in the right direction. So as far as I'm concerned, this is still good. So next up, you have the Bryan Danielson promo that leads into MJF interrupting it and kind of continuing. There was a lot to this promo, but it's one of those things where, and this might be a bit of a controversial take, because I talked about when I did the review on Elimination Chamber, I talked about how I'm just not interested in the Cody Rhodes thing. And I have my own issues with Cody Rhodes the last couple of years. Even in AEW, I was getting frustrated with certain elements of his character and his gimmick. And it's funny because a lot of times when MJF does his promos, he talks about his best friend Cody Rhodes, and obviously they have a pre-existing relationship. But it's funny because they're different in the way they do their promos. However, there's certain elements of it that I feel both guys do that eventually start to wear thin a little bit. And it's not because it's not good. I want to make clear on that. Part of my frustration, I'll say Cody Rhodes first, and then I'll bring it back to MJF. Part of my frustration with them is that they are really good. They're students of the game. They understand that the key here is to get emotion. The key here is to draw, the crowd's reaction one way or the other. And both guys have a slightly different style of doing it, because Cody Rhodes' style has always, to me, felt his cadence, the way he presents it. And I want to be clear, he knows how to work with the crowd. He knows how to respond to them, especially now. He's gotten really so good at it that he can kind of play off of what the crowd's doing, respond, say things in a certain way, but his cadence always feels like he's reading a teleprompter. It's hilarious because I don't think he's scripting his promos at all, but at the same time, like, if you had told me he had a teleprompter right in front of his face, even though I know he doesn't, I would believe you, because it's kind of a very methodical, very paced way that almost feels like he's reading off of a sheet. But he's not. He's literally standing in the middle of the ring, the camera's there, and he's doing his thing. But it's just an awkward way of doing it. But the issue that I have with a lot of it, in addition to the odd delivery, is that it's emotion for emotion's sake. I just got to reach and grab something, and I'm going to grab something from my life. I'm going to grab something from my history. I'm going to grab something which can be really good, but when you do it every time, it loses its impact. Bring it back to MJF, that's my concern, where I think MJF sometimes goes for that personal shot, which makes sense with his character, but sometimes it's so heavy-handed that it almost undermines what he's trying to do. And in this case, with the Bryan Danielson thing, Bryan Danielson started off with the promo, working with the crowd, doing a babyface promo. MJF comes out and says, people don't know the real you. I'm not going to hit every blow by blow. But he effectively says that Bryan Danielson's love of the spotlight and professional wrestling supersedes his love of his family. And that's the angle he decides to take on it. A couple of problems with this. Not any specific issue with the idea of taking a personal shot at his opponent, because he does that in a lot of his promos. But the problem that I saw with it is that he kept going down to the ring, kept getting increasingly personal, and made clear he was going to be very personal with it. And then he did the bit where he says, now I'd like to take a moment and talk to Bryan Danielson's children. I'm paraphrasing. But then Bryan Danielson responds by saying, don't you dare bring my children into this, or I'll kick your head off, or I'll kick your ass, or whatever. But then here's the problem. MJF continues to go straight down the path he's going to go to, names his children, talks about how he's going to hurt their dad and all this bit and this whole thing. And this whole time, they keep cutting to Bryan Danielson looking at him angrier and angrier. But at the same time, he literally already said he was going to kick his ass if he brought up his kids. But then he's standing there, letting MJF do this. And MJF, by the time he's done running this whole thing down, he is literally feet from the ring, walking towards the ring. And Bryan Danielson is powerless to stop him from speaking. He cannot leave the confines of the ring. The ropes are an impenetrable force. He has to wait until MJF enters into the ring before he can finally attack him. which honestly I thought was really dumb. It was just weird. I was like, why don't you just attack him before he even gets into the whole thing? Once he starts invoking your children, you could literally jump out of the ring and attack him. You don't have to wait until he comes in the ring and does his whole bit. But I just thought that was strange, a strange decision. In the end, it ended up being a pull apart brawl. I get it. We're building heat to the pay per view, fine. But MJF always reaches, like I said, for again the low hanging fruit with your opponent. That is normal. That is standard MJF fare. But the other piece of it was that the kind of almost half sob story, half explanation that the belt is the only thing that matters to him and all that is like MJF has a fiance. Uh, he reaches into the real world. He's even mentioned his hot girlfriend in the past, who is his fiance, and it's like he has nothing in his life except this belt. And it's like literally one person could literally just call him out and go, "You mean other than your fiance that you proposed to?" And she said yes. Unless that's changed, I don't know. I don't know what the situation is with that. Like their personal lives don't matter to me, but I'm just saying they've brought it up before, or MJF has brought it up before. So literally, you could throw that back in his face and go, "What the hell are you even talking about?" Like what are you're just going into your past and just talking about this traumatic thing and this horrible thing. You have nothing, and like your parents have literally been on the show. They've literally been there before and they've referenced it. It's so weird. Whatever, I guess it's just a strange decision. Again, it goes back to, like I said, the Cody Rhodes thing where he'll talk about the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and all this, and really try to like ham-fistedly explain how this is so emotional. And it's like, it's professional wrestling. Dusty Rhodes did not win the world championship because Vince McMahon did not like fat guys. So he was never going to win it. It didn't matter what he did. That's why he put him in polka dots. That's it. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more. You can try to make more out of it if you want, but that's fine. But I don't believe you. The problem is, unfortunately, even as a fan trying to suspend disbelief here, I don't believe you. You are very sincere in this thing I don't believe. With MJF, sometimes he reaches in and he'll borrow elements of his past that I think add a certain credibility to the story. But the problem is it's just for the sake of shock factor. And the problem is with shock factor is if you do shock factor too many times, it loses its impact. So I feel like being sparing with that and using it at the right time in the right places. It's just strange using it in this particular feud because, again, unless something strange happens, my expectation would be that his title reign continues to another few feuds through the rest of this year. So it isn't going to end here, and you're like firing bullets out of the chamber just to get through this one. I can't blame him because you got to sell the pay-per-view, but it's just an interesting statement. So I needed to take some time to kind of break this one down a little bit. Again, fully my opinion. Like I'll accept that other folks will definitely be a lot more interested in what he had to say. Will probably respond more strongly to it. Maybe think it's a fantastic promo. I thought it was good. I thought the guys put a lot of passion into it. I just feel like we're using a lot of the bullets that we would try to use and try to use every emotional heartstring all at the same time for a show that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And it's like, okay, but we got a go home show too, man. So I hope you have something left for the go home show. I don't know what's going to be, but I hope so. But we'll see. Fine. And apparently Bryan Danielson can be stopped by the ropes that cause him powerless to be able to respond. So just a little bit strange. Okay, so I spent a lot of time on that, but let's get into the next piece, the AEW Revolution Battle Royal. So it was a bunch of tag teams in there brawling to get one of the slots into the AEW Revolution, I think, four-way for the AEW Tag Team Championship. So you had a lot of different teams in there involved in it. It was a pretty long match, all things considered. There were some storyline elements playing out because you did have Josh Woods being involved in the early part of it until Mark Briscoe came out and began brawling with him to the back. So it's one of those things where you had a couple of different storyline elements play into it, which is fine. In the end, let's just skip ahead a little bit. In the end, it was Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal winning the Battle Royal with a ton of help from Saddam Singh. A ton of help from Saddam Singh, which is fine. Like like I said, it's a four-way tag team match for the pay-per-view, which is fine. And even they do a backstage vignette where the Guns come by in order to try to propose, some kind of shenanigans in the match. But at the end of the day, it's fine. Obviously, people are going to be sick of seeing Jeff Jarrett. I'm not necessarily keen on seeing it either, but at the same time, they're going to be one of the four teams in there. It's not really too much of an issue for me outside of the fact that, this was kind of to kill time during the show. This really did feel like filler to me. Although there were some storyline pieces that did play out and some things that can spin off from that, which is fine. I think that from that element of it's okay, but I didn't spend too much time like heavily paying attention to it. It was just kind of there for me. All right, next up here was backstage. Tony Khan is shown. He's going to make a huge announcement, but he thinks it's best made by a major star. So Adam Cole appears. Okay, we really need to have a discussion, and I'm not going to spend time on this particular video doing it, but I just want to be clear about this. we got to really be careful when we're using the words huge announcement all the time. Again, you lose impact when you use this too much. And Tony Khan is there to make a huge announcement, but in the end, he lets Adam Cole do it, which is fine. Then why don't you just let Adam Cole do it in the first place? But in the end, it's fine. So the announcement was that they're going to have a weekly 1 hour television show in March that's going to start in March that's going to follow Dynamite. It's going to be called AEW All Access. That is going to be a detailed look at something, and it's going to involve a lot of the Adam Cole story. A lot. So he also mentioned that Britt Baker's going to be in it, which is fine. Now here, a couple of quick things. So from the perspective of just general, it's not really a huge announcement. However, it is a good announcement, and I'll quickly say why. To me, it's a commitment from the network to have more AEW programming, which is to say that they're actually expanding the relationship. And I don't remember exactly when the contract renewal would be coming up, but I think it's in the next year or so. So for them, having a greater commitment from the network is a great thing, and providing more programming for the network is a great thing leading into a potential contract renewal. A contract renewal that could be more money for AEW, that could solidify them and make the company really solid. It's not like the Khan family doesn't have a ton of money, but a strong commitment from the network saying, we not only want you to stick around, we want you to stick around and produce additional content for us that we're going to put on air, is a good thing. Am I going to check it out? I'm going to check out the first couple of weeks of this for sure, see how it is, and if I like it, I'll keep watching it. If I'm not interested, I'll drop it. But sure, I'm interested in seeing it, and I just think it's good that they're basically getting a commitment from the network to have some additional airtime. Truthfully, though, for me, it would be better to get more airtime for Rampage, and it would be better to find a better time slot for Rampage. That would be, to me, a huge announcement. Otherwise, this is a good announcement, but not a huge announcement. Now, Adam Cole kind of pairs that up as well, stating that at the same time that the new show is going to start, he's actually going to make his in-ring return, which is also a good piece. So I guess if we combine the two of them, it's kind of a huge announcement. It's good that Adam Cole's coming back, so that's great. That's another positive as far as the division is concerned, because it offers another set of matchups. It offers another set of potential storylines and things that they can do with Adam Cole, so they can do a couple different things, so that's great. It's going to freshen things up and give a little bit of a different factor into the show. Great. And at the same time, getting a commitment from the network to have another hour of a weekly television, that's wonderful from the potential long-term of it. So I'm glad for them, and I'm glad that Adam Cole's coming back. We knew it was going to be sooner or later, but combining the two, I think, is great, because at least it means now we know when Adam Cole is projected to come back, and then we'll have to see what they end up doing with him once he starts up again. All right, that leads us into main event time. Jon Moxley taking on Evil Uno. And you kind of know where this is going to go. Now, Evil Uno did acquit himself fairly well. Got in a ton of chops, big boot, put in a fair bit of intensity, tried to at least make it interesting as far as that's concerned. But it ends up being a lot of offense from Moxley, because eventually he tries to rip the mask off Evil Uno, and then Moxley regains control, launches him to the steel chairs, busts him open, and then from then on in, it's a Moxley match where we're going to get a ton of blood. Like, that's basically how that works. It's usually how that happens. And then it keeps going back and forth, and Evil Uno is able to hit 2 pile drivers and gets a near fall, which is great. And then eventually Moxley responds, though, puts in a sleeper hold, transitions into a driving elbow, and then transitions into a bulldog. And the bulldog is where the things ends, because Evil Uno at this point is bleeding all over the place, like Moxley's covered in his blood, and the blood's pouring out of his mask, and he ends up fading out, and then Jon Moxley gets the win. Kudos to them for the intensity, and that is actually Jon Moxley's 100th AEW victory. So a milestone victory. He's the first competitor to hit 100 wins in AEW. They had mentioned that leading into the broadcast, which is fine. So Jon Moxley wins, and then after the match, Moxley refuses to let go of the submission. Silver and Reynolds hit the ring. Wheeler, Yuta, and Claudio come out, and the Blackpool Combat Club at this point are kind of tweeners, but they're leaning steadily towards kind of the heelish side. So I think we're going to definitely see what happens as far as that's concerned, but we'll see what happens with that one. But for now, that's kind of the direction it seems to be going. So now they're all fighting each other, and then Adam Page comes out to make the save, attack Moxley, and that's basically what kind of ends the show. So it's another step towards kind of building up the Texas Death Match that's going to be on the Revolution show. We've got the title match with Bryan Danielson and MJF in the 60-minute Iron Man match, and you're going to have a triple threat for the AEW Women's Championships. So we actually had pieces built up every step along the way, and we added the Jericho and Ricky Starks match as far as that's concerned. So the card is starting to fill out. We're a couple of weeks away from Revolution, and the card is starting to fill out, which is fine. That's what you want. And then obviously we've got the Go Home show coming up, I think, next week, leading into, I think, the pay-per-view is the 5th. So next week should be the Go Home shows. And then hopefully there'll be at least something else just to finalize, maybe fill out what's left of the card. And I'm just hoping that the storyline progression continues in a way that makes sense, because now we've established some of these matches and we've got a couple of the conditions set up. Now it's just, How do you want to keep building on what you're doing? And from what I saw in the Rampage ad, you're bringing back Lance Archer, which is good. That offers another opportunity to do some stuff. The House of Black is going to be confronting the Elite, so potentially you could be building up towards something like that. That could be a Revolution match, so that'd be interesting. We'll see. I do see some potential moving parts, but it's one of those things where the pieces are still kind of floating in space. It's hard to put all of them together. I'm hoping the card, I think by the time it's all said and done, will be decent. It's just I'm going to be curious if the build will get us there, because now it feels like we're kind of hastily throwing things together last minute. Literally, we came up with a couple of the matches here 2 weeks out from the pay-per-view. It just feels like we had so much time between pay-per-views. You should be building it a little bit more clearly and a little bit more slowly. Obviously, the title match has had plenty of builds, so that'll be fine. But some of these other ones is like, we're 2 weeks out and we have the match just now. We figured it out. Hey guys, we're gonna do this match. And then of course, I think you're gonna have Wardlow and Samoa Joe. So I think that'll be fun as well. You'll have enough matches in there. I don't think that'll be a concern, but we'll see kind of how these pieces play out. Overall, I'm not unhappy with the show. It wasn't the craziest show, but it did do a lot of the things that I think it needed to do. I'm trying to think of exactly where to position it. I think I did. I'm going to say a B minus. I can't quite give it a C plus, although I could make an argument for it. It was a decent show that did progress things, and I think that's the key for me in this one. The reason it keeps it out of being a C is that there was some progression in some of the things, even if not everything fell the way that I would have liked it to fall. It still made sense, and it still made enough sense that I was satisfied with how we're progressing, although I would love to see a little bit more urgency in some elements to really push things forward. And in others, I would like a little bit more sense brought into it. So you got to be really careful. There's a balancing act to be had. Again, it's the same thing that I talked about with the WWE review. Nothing's perfect right now. Everything has a couple of these weird little quirks involved in it. Everybody, I think, is still trying to find their footing and trying to figure out what will work best for them. But I was reasonably satisfied, and I thought the show was paced well for what it was. So from that perspective of it, I can't complain too much. With that said, I'll leave it at that. Be curious to get your thoughts on it. Did you enjoy the show? Did you not like the show? Did you like some segments? Did you enjoy the in-ring action? I'd be curious to see how those components of it broke out. So hopefully we'll get back into the swing of things here and be able to do these reviews for Dynamite going forward. But, no promises. I'm trying to work my way back into it. But this was fun. So I enjoyed doing the show, and I'll try to come back with a couple more details and a few more notes in future reviews. But there'll be more videos coming up in the channel in some capacity. So I'd like to get your opinion in the comments. Like if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.